work, but the moment he stepped inside, he felt something different in the air, an unusual stillness, the kind that makes a person pause without knowing why. He followed the faint scraping sound coming from the living room, and when he turned the corner, he froze. Claire, usually graceful and composed, was crawling on all fours with her arms stretched deep under the couch, her hair falling over her face as she tried to reach something. It was such an unexpected sight that he almost spoke her name, but curiosity kept him quiet for one more second. He took a step closer, and that step changed everything. She suddenly pushed herself backward to shift the couch, and bumped right into him. She gasped sharply, startled, spinning around with wide eyes that reflected both shock and embarrassment. For a moment they simply stared at each other, and in that brief pause, Ethan felt a kind of electricity he hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge before, a pull toward her that he had been denying for years. Claire quickly tucked a strand of hair behind her ear as if trying to hide the way her face flushed. She said she was searching for her grandmother's locket, the one piece of jewelry she cherished more than anything. He could hear the strain in her voice, the weight of something deeper than a lost trinket. In that instant, Ethan's concern shifted from curiosity to a quiet ache in his chest, the kind that comes from caring too much. He had always known Claire was strong, but seeing her on the floor, desperate to find something that mattered to her, made him understand how much she was quietly carrying. He knelt beside her without thinking, offering to help, and she gave him a small, grateful nod, though her eyes still held a heaviness he couldn't quite explain. They searched together in silence, but the silence wasn't empty, it was filled with all the words they had never dared to say. Each passing second only made Ethan more aware of how close she was, how fragile she seemed beneath her calm mask. He wanted to ask her why she looked so tired lately, why her smile didn't reach her eyes anymore, why she seemed to be drifting away from everyone, including him. But he kept those questions inside, afraid of stepping into a place in her heart he wasn't sure he was allowed to enter. Claire's fingers trembled slightly as she lifted the couch skirt again, and Ethan noticed. He wanted to reach out, steady her hand, tell her she didn't have to carry everything alone. But before he found the courage, she drew in a shaky breath, and he realized something. The locket wasn't just a memory of her grandmother, it was her anchor, the last symbol of someone who had loved her unconditionally. Losing it was more than misplacing jewelry, it was reopening a wound she hadn't fully healed. Ethan's heart tightened. He wanted to fix this for her. He wanted to be the person she leaned on. He wanted her to look at him the way she used to, before distance and unspoken feelings began to pull them apart. As he reached under the couch, his hand brushed against something small, but it wasn't the locket, just a forgotten button. Claire sighed, and the sound made him look at her. She gave him a tired smile, but the sadness behind it hit him harder than he expected. Without thinking, he shifted closer, lowering his voice as if the moment demanded gentleness. "We'll find it," he said. She nodded, but her eyes glistened for a moment before she looked away. Ethan knew that whatever she was feeling went far beyond a lost locket. Something in her life had been unraveling slowly, quietly, and she had been trying to hide it from everyone, including him. And standing there in the soft afternoon light, watching her force a brave smile, he felt something inside him shift. He realized that this small, accidental moment, walking in on her crawling on the floor, startling her, seeing her vulnerability, was revealing a side of Claire he had never fully seen before. Not the strong, collected woman the world knew, but the Claire who carried heartbreak in silence, who tried to stay steady even when her world was shaking. And he couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to learn something that would change everything between them. They kept searching, their shoulders brushing every few seconds, yet neither spoke about the growing tension, the quiet warmth, the unspoken pull. Still, underneath the fast, frantic pacing of the moment, Ethan sensed a twist waiting ahead, something he wasn't prepared for, something that would make this day unforgettable. And deep down, he knew this was not just about finding a lost locket. It was about finding the beginning of a truth between them that had been waiting far too long to be seen. Claire and Ethan kept searching, the room quiet except for the soft scraping of furniture and the faint sound of their breaths, but beneath the silence was a tension neither dared to name. Claire's movements were quick and unfocused, almost restless, and Ethan could see she wasn't just looking for the locket, she was trying to keep herself from falling apart. She kept pushing books aside, lifting cushions, checking under tables, all with a forced calm that didn't match the worry in her eyes, and every time he tried to catch her gaze, she looked away as if afraid he would see too much. Ethan finally asked if she was okay, but she just said she was tired and stressed, brushing off his concern with a small smile that didn't feel real. He knew her better than that. Ever since college, he had learned the difference between her real smile and the one she used when she was hiding pain. She sat back on her heels, breathing hard, dust on her jeans, and he wanted to reach out and steady her, to take some of the weight she clearly carried, but she shook her head before he could speak, as though she could feel his worry pressing in. When he gently asked what was really going on, her voice cracked for a second before she steadied it, saying she missed her grandmother, pretending that was the only thing troubling her, yet Ethan could hear something deeper beneath her words, an ache she was trying to swallow. Claire tried to laugh off her embarrassment about him catching her crawling under the couch, but her laugh felt stiff, like she was trying to distract both of them from the truth. Ethan's chest tightened when she turned away, wiping at a speck of dust with more force than necessary. She wasn't just upset about the locket, something else was breaking her from the inside, and he hated that she felt she had to face it alone. He moved closer, lowering his voice the way he always did when he didn't want to scare her off. "Talk to me," he said. "You've been distant for weeks." She froze. For a moment, he thought she might finally open up, but then she stood abruptly and reached behind a shelf, pretending to focus on another potential hiding spot. "I'm fine," she insisted, but her voice was too quick, too tight. Ethan didn't push, though he wanted to. He didn't want to corner her, not when she already seemed so fragile, but he couldn't shake the feeling that she was slipping away from him, pulling back not because she wanted to, but because something inside her was telling her she had to. They moved around the room again, checking under the rug, between couch cushions, behind the TV stand, both pretending the search was all that mattered. But Ethan kept catching small details, the way Claire's fingers trembled when she lifted a stack of magazines, the way she bit the inside of her cheek when she thought he wasn't looking, the way the warmth in her eyes had dimmed lately. Finally she crouched by the couch again, and Ethan joined her. Their shoulders brushed lightly, and Claire stiffened for a moment before pretending not to notice. The closeness between them had always been easy, natural, but now it felt fragile, as if one wrong word could shatter everything they had. Ethan could feel the tension radiating off her, and not the kind caused by a missing object, but the kind caused by something emotional, something she had been avoiding. He wondered if he had done something wrong, if he had said something without realizing it, or if she was dealing with a part of her life she didn't want to share. He hated the distance forming between them, a quiet, invisible wall neither of them knew how to talk about. Just as he opened his mouth to try again, Claire's expression changed. She stopped moving. Her eyes locked on something under the couch, widening not with excitement, but with something like fear or disbelief. She slowly reached beneath the frame, her hand brushing against something small and wooden. Ethan leaned closer. "Claire? What is it?" She didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft and uncertain, the words barely leaving her lips. "I've found something," she whispered. But it wasn't the way someone sounded when they found a lost piece of jewelry. It was the way someone sounded when they stumbled onto something they weren't ready to face. Ethan felt the atmosphere shift. The search was no longer about a missing locket, there was something else under that couch, something that made Claire's breath catch, something she wasn't expecting at all. In that single moment, Ethan knew the day was about to change direction again, pulling them deeper into a truth she had been hiding and he had been too afraid to ask about. And as Claire slowly pulled the wooden object into the light, Ethan realized the emotional distance between them wasn't just coincidence, it had a story, a reason, and he was about to step right into the middle of it. Claire pulled out the small wooden box slowly, as if she wasn't sure she should be touching it, and Ethan could see from the way her hands trembled that this discovery was not something simple or harmless, it meant something to her, something tied to emotions she had buried deep. The box was old, covered in dust, the hinges slightly rusted, and Claire held it with a kind of fragile care that made Ethan's heartbeat quicken. She sat down on the floor without a word, her breath shallow, her eyes fixed on the lid as though opening it would change something in her life. Ethan knelt beside her, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel his presence if she needed it. For a long moment she just stared, and he realized she recognized the box, recognized it in a way that frightened her. When she finally opened it, the room seemed to grow quiet, as though the world was waiting with them. Inside, wrapped in an old ribbon, was a folded letter yellowed with age. Claire's hands shook as she picked it up, her thumb brushing the familiar handwriting on the front. "It's my grandmother's," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan watched her unfold the letter with slow, careful movements, her breath quickening as her eyes scanned the first lines. Whatever she read hit her hard. Her lips parted slightly, her eyes filling with tears that she didn't even try to hide. Ethan wanted to ask what it said, but he held back, letting her read. She reached the middle of the letter and swallowed hard, her shoulders trembling. Without looking at him, she handed him the paper, as though she didn't trust herself to speak. Ethan read the final lines, his chest tightening as he took in the message. Her grandmother had written a note for the future, a message for Claire to open when her heart finally realized who she truly loved, telling her not to run from the truth, not to lose someone out of fear, not to let pain keep her from being honest. The words were gentle but powerful, the kind that hit deep because they carried a lifetime of wisdom and love. Ethan looked at Claire, and she finally met his eyes, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks. "She always knew," Claire whispered, her voice shaking. "She knew I'd fall for someone who would scare me because they mattered too much." Ethan felt the breath leave his lungs. He didn't want to assume anything, but the way she looked at him, soft, scared, vulnerable, felt like a confession without words. Claire wiped her tears, but more came, her emotions spilling out faster than she could hide them. "I tried to ignore it," she admitted quietly. "I tried to pretend it was nothing. But the closer I got to you, the more terrified I became. And when I lost the locket, it felt like I was losing the last bit of courage she gave me." Ethan wanted to reach for her, but he stayed still, letting her speak, letting her finally let go of everything she had been holding inside. Claire looked down at the letter again, her voice softening. "She told me not to run from the person I always returned to," she whispered. "And I think she meant you." The words hung in the air like a fragile truth, delicate and uncertain. Ethan's chest ached, not with pain, but with something warm and overwhelming. For years he had felt a pull toward her, something deeper than friendship, something he had buried because he didn't want to lose her. And now he realized she had been doing the same. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say anything, Claire gasped softly, her eyes widening as she looked past him toward the couch. Something small glinted under the frame. She leaned forward, her hand trembling as she reached beneath the couch one more time. Ethan watched as she lifted the object slowly, her breath catching. It was the locket. The one piece of her grandmother she feared she had lost forever. She held it tightly, pressing it to her chest, her eyes closing with relief. But something in her expression had changed, not just relief, but understanding, as if finding the locket at this exact moment meant something. She opened her eyes and looked at Ethan again, and he could tell she was standing on the edge of a decision that could change everything between them. The room felt different now, still quiet, but full of a new tension, a new possibility, a new truth neither of them could ignore anymore. Claire's fingers tightened around the locket, and she took a shaky breath as if preparing to step into a new chapter of her life. Ethan could feel it in the air, could feel her heart leaning towards something she had been too afraid to admit, and he knew this moment wasn't just about a letter or a locket, it was the beginning of something much bigger. Something fragile. Something real. Something that neither of them could turn away from now. Ethan reached for Claire's hand slowly, giving her time to pull away if she needed to, but she didn't. Instead, her fingers tightened around the locket as if she needed something solid to steady herself, And when she looked up at him, he saw a fear mixed with hope, a fear of being wrong, and a hope that she wasn't. He spoke softly, careful not to overwhelm her, asking if this was why she had been avoiding him, why she had been distant, why her smile had faded in the past few months. Claire nodded, her breath unsteady as she tried to explain what had been happening inside her, how she had been fighting something she didn't know how to control. She admitted she had been afraid of ruining the most important relationship in her life, afraid that if she let Ethan know how she felt, she would lose him forever. She told him she had felt the shift for months, maybe even years, but every time she felt herself falling deeper, she would pull back, trying to protect herself from heartbreak. Ethan listened quietly, his chest tightening with every word, because he realized she had been carrying all this fear alone while he had been carrying his own but never dared to speak it. With a shaky breath, Claire finally said what she had been holding back. Every time he walked into a room, her heart reacted before her mind could stop it, and she felt drawn to him in a way that scared her because she didn't know if he felt the same. She confessed she had convinced herself that if she stayed silent, she wouldn't have to face losing him. Ethan felt something inside him break, not with pain, but with the overwhelming weight of years of unspoken longing finally rising to the surface. He told her he had loved her for years too, quietly, stubbornly, waiting without realizing he was waiting. He admitted he had held back because he respected her too much to risk hurting her, and he feared she didn't want anything more than friendship. Claire covered her mouth as tears streamed down her cheeks, not from sadness but from the release that finally came after months of holding everything inside. She leaned closer without even realizing it, pulled forward by a truth too strong to ignore. For a moment, the world felt still, both of them suspended in a fragile space between confession and possibility. But just as they leaned toward each other, something clicked under the couch, a soft metallic sound that pulled Claire's attention back to the floor. She wiped her tears and reached under the couch again, finding a forgotten chain tangled near the leg. It was the locket's broken clasp. She stared at it, her expression shifting from surprise to something thoughtful and emotional, as if the small, broken piece carried its own message. She held the clasp in one hand, the locket in the other, and whispered that maybe it wasn't broken on accident, maybe it was just time for it to be found again, time for her to stop hiding, time for her heart to stop pretending. Ethan watched her with a soft ache in his chest, realizing how symbolic this moment was for her, rediscovering something precious right when she was finally brave enough to face her feelings. Claire closed her fingers around the locket, breathing deeply, as though gathering courage for whatever came next. She looked at Ethan again, this time without fear in her eyes, only clarity, a quiet decision forming in her expression. The tension in the room changed, turning warm and tender, as though the air itself recognized the shift between them. Ethan gently reached for the locket, not to take it from her, but to help her hold it steady. Their fingers brushed, and neither of them pulled away. Claire's cheeks colored softly, but she didn't break eye contact. Instead, she let herself lean closer, trusting him in a way she had been too scared to before. Ethan cupped her cheek lightly, pausing long enough to let her back away if she wanted, but she didn't. She leaned into his touch, her breath catching in a way that told him everything she hadn't said before. She whispered that her grandmother always believed love showed itself in the quiet moments, the simple choices, the little things people did without thinking. And when she looked at Ethan, she said she finally understood what her grandmother meant. Ethan felt his throat tighten, his emotions too strong to hide. He told her that he had been afraid for so long, afraid of losing her, afraid of being too late, but he wasn't afraid anymore, not if she felt the same. Claire smiled then, a real smile, full of relief and a little disbelief, as though she still wasn't sure this moment was truly happening. She reached out and took his hand fully this time, holding it with a kind of certainty that made Ethan feel something deep and steady in his chest. She whispered that she didn't want to run anymore. She didn't want fear to decide her life. She wanted to see where their feelings could take them, even if it scared her. Ethan's heart felt full in a way he had never experienced. He lifted her hand to his chest, holding it there so she could feel the way her presence made his heart race. Claire's eyes softened as she realized the truth of his words, not spoken, but felt. But before either of them could step fully into the moment, Claire glanced at the locket again, her expression turning thoughtful. She opened it slowly, revealing the tiny picture of her grandmother inside, and whispered a quiet thank you, as though this moment was guided by something bigger than coincidence. She closed the locket, held it gently in her palm, and then looked back at Ethan with a new kind of courage, one she hadn't shown before. She told him that finding the locket tonight felt like a sign, not just that she should stop hiding her feelings, but that she was ready to start something new, something honest, something real. Ethan nodded, understanding her in a way that didn't need words. He squeezed her hand, promising silently to move at her pace, to be patient, to be steady, to meet her where she needed him. Claire leaned her forehead against his, her breath warm and shaky, and Ethan felt everything in his life settle into place. For the first time, they weren't running from their feelings or pretending they didn't exist. They were standing in the middle of them, together. Claire whispered his name softly, and Ethan held her a little closer, knowing this was the beginning of something they could no longer ignore. And as she rested her hand over the locket, he knew she wasn't choosing the past anymore. She was choosing the future, choosing honesty, choosing courage, choosing him.